All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. We're looking at the complete historical narrative of the Book of Ruth. Now, on the surface, it really just looks like a localized family drama, right? But as we peel back the layers, it's actually this monumental pivot point in biblical history.
I mean, think about the core question we're exploring here. How in the world did a destitute, marginalized Moabite widow become the great-grandmother of Israel's absolute greatest king? It's incredible. It is a story of sheer survival, of ancient legal customs, and just profound human kindness. And it perfectly bridges the gap between that totally chaotic era of the biblical judges and the golden age of Israel's monarchy.
So we can look at this narrative like a brilliantly structured four-act play. We'll start with the famine and loss in Moab, move to Ruth's famous vow of loyalty, then the Bethlehem barley harvest, the kinsman redeemer custom, and finally we'll look at the lineage of King David. Act 1. Famine and loss in Moab. The story opens up during the era of the biblical judges, which, as we know, was a time of intense political and religious chaos in Israel. There's no king, and a severe famine has just struck the land. Now, what's literally fascinating right off the bat is how the original Hebrew names map out the literary brilliance and honestly the bitter irony of the story. So a man named Elimelech takes his wife, Naomi, and their two sons out of Bethlehem to survive. Bethlehem literally translates to house of bread, but ironically, it's experiencing a devastating famine. Then you have Elimelech, whose name means my God is king, yet he abandons his homeland for the pagan territory of Moab, the land of Israel's traditional enemies. The sons' names, Mahlon and Chilion, they translate to sickness and pining. Talk about foreshadowing a tragic fate. And Naomi, whose name means pleasant, well, she's about to suffer unimaginable grief. We're looking at a devastating 10-year timeline here where Naomi basically loses everything. First, her husband Elimelech dies. Then, her sons marry two Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And actually, this in itself was highly unusual, since Moabites were historically hostile to Israel and worshipped entirely different gods. Fast forward about 10 years, and both sons die too, leaving behind three completely destitute widows. Without husbands or heirs in an ancient patriarchal society, these women were entirely vulnerable. So hearing that the famine back in Israel has finally ended, Naomi makes the desperate, absolute last resort decision to return to her homeland. Moving on to Act 2, Ruth's vow of loyalty. This brings us to a pivotal crossroads in the narrative. Naomi urges her daughters-in-law to just stay in Moab, but Ruth makes a choice that literally changes everything. Naomi really tries to release the young women. She tells them to go back to their mother's houses and remarry. Orpah reluctantly leaves, choosing the safety of the familiar, which makes total sense. But Ruth stays. In the ancient world, leaving your homeland and your gods was practically unheard of. Yet, in this incredibly self-sacrificial vow, Ruth renounces her native land. She binds her life entirely to Naomi and the God of Israel. She even goes as far as invoking the covenant name of God, Yahweh, in a solemn oath, basically declaring that only death will part them. Ruth's vow is the ultimate textbook embodiment of a vital Hebrew concept, Hesed. If you aren't familiar, Hesed is this thematic thread of loving kindness that weaves through the entire narrative. It isn't just a feeling, right? It's covenant loyalty, it's loving kindness, and it's faithfulness demonstrated in actual tangible action. Ruth absolutely did not have to stay with Naomi. By law and custom, she was totally free to go, but she deliberately chose to sacrifice her own potential security in Moab for the sake of her destitute mother-in-law. So, when the two women finally arrive back in Bethlehem, the whole town is astir. But Naomi's grief is so profound, she actually asks the townswoman not to call her Naomi anymore. Instead, she says, "Call me Mara," which means bitter. She openly laments that the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with her. She says she went away full, but God brought her back empty. Now, the obvious irony here is that she isn't entirely empty, is she? She literally has Ruth standing right beside her. That leads us right into Act 3, the Bethlehem barley harvest. We arrive back in Judah just in time for the harvest season, which beautifully symbolizes the beginning of new life and hope for our protagonists. To survive, Ruth really takes the initiative to find food. She utilizes an ancient welfare system outlined in the Torah called gleaning. This law required landowners to not harvest the very edges of their fields. They had to leave the leftovers for the poor, the widow, and the foreigner.
Ruth, of course, fits all three of those categories. So she goes out to glean, and, as the text notes, quote unquote, by chance, which, let's be real, is a massive nod to providential coincidence here, she is led directly into the fields of a wealthy, prominent relative of Naomi's late husband, and his name is Boaz.
Now, Boaz could have easily just ignored her, but instead, he acts with this extraordinary integrity and kindness. He essentially reciprocates Ruth's hesed. He notices her gleaning in his fields, he ensures her physical safety by specifically warning the young men not to bother her, and he even invites this foreign widow to share his food at mealtime. Boaz tells her straight up that he's heard all about her immense loyalty to Naomi. He totally goes above and beyond the strict letter of the gleaning law, ensuring she has plenty of food to take back home. And when Naomi sees all that abundance, she instantly recognizes the hand of God at work. Act 4, the Kinsman Redeemer Custom. Recognizing Boaz's kindness and, crucially, his family connection, Naomi orchestrates a rather daring midnight plan at the threshing floor to secure their future. So Naomi instructs Ruth to wash up, put on her best clothes, and head down to the threshing floor where Boaz is sleeping to protect the grain. In the middle of the night, Ruth boldly and honestly quite riskily uncovers Boaz's feet and asks him to spread his cloak over her. She's essentially asking him to step up as their Goel Hadam, or kinsman redeemer. This was a socio-legal custom where a close relative was obligated to rescue family property and marry a childless widow to continue the deceased husband's lineage. Boaz is deeply moved by her noble character. But plot twist, he reveals a complication. There is actually another relative who is closer in line than he is. Early the very next morning, the action moves to the city gate. Now, the city gate served as the administrative and judicial center of an ancient town. So this turns the gate into a thrilling ancient courtroom where the survival of Naomi's family line literally hangs entirely in the balance. Boaz gathers 10 elders of the town and intercepts that closer relative. And I love this. The text deliberately leaves this man unnamed. In Hebrew, he's just called Ploni Almoni, which essentially translates to Mr. So-and-so. It's basically a subtle historical dig at his refusal to help. This scene brilliantly illustrates the ancient legal procedure. Step 1. Boaz publicly offers the right to buy Naomi's land to this closest relative first. At first, the guy agrees, but then Boaz drops the crucial condition. Acquiring the land also means taking Ruth, the Moabite, as a wife to maintain the name of the dead on his inheritance. Well, the relative immediately backs out, terrified it will financially jeopardize his own estate's inheritance. And to formalize this ancient contract, they didn't sign a piece of paper, they performed a unique custom. The nearer kinsman literally takes off his sandal and hands it to Boaz right there before the elders. Boom, the legal path is officially cleared. Epilogue, the lineage of King David. With all the legal matters completely settled at the city gate, the story resolves in a joyous epilogue that echoes way, way beyond the small town of Bethlehem. Boaz and Ruth marry, and the narrator explicitly notes that God grants Ruth conception. They have a son, and they name him Obed. This is just a complete and total reversal of the tragedy and emptiness we saw back in Act 1. The townswomen, who earlier heard Naomi call herself bitter, are now celebrating with her. Naomi places the child on her lap, acting as a nurse to him. Her family line, which was once teetering on the very brink of extinction, has been totally rescued and filled with new life. But the story doesn't just end with a happy family. The book concludes with a genealogy that drops the massive historical weight of these events. This child, Obed, is just 3 generations away from greatness. He becomes the father of Jesse, who becomes the father of King David. Just think about that. The destitute Moabite widow we met at the beginning has been woven directly into the royal lineage of Israel. The Book of Ruth is essentially a masterclass in how God works behind the scenes through the faithful, everyday actions of ordinary people. And it leaves us with this powerful, lingering thought. How might your everyday acts of loyalty and kindness change the future? I mean, what seems like a simple act of integrity and hesed today could be the very thing that ripples out to shape history for generations to come. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this deeper look brought the incredible story of Ruth to life for you.